This is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Last month, the Miami Herald and the Tampa Bay Times published an explosive story revealing that the state's Office of Insurance Regulation, known as OIR, had written a report in 2022 claiming that while some insurance companies were complaining they were going broke and therefore needed a rate increase, there was evidence these companies may have hidden their profits by transferring money into so-called affiliate companies. That draft 2022 report was never finished or delivered to legislators. And when the newspaper tried to get a copy of the report, they were stonewalled and misled for years. In response to the story, House Speaker Danny Perez launched an investigation into what happened, directing the House Insurance and Banking Committee to hold a special hearing to try and get answers.
You know, our purpose today is to find out if insurance companies have been allegedly ripping us off, ripping the citizens of Florida off. Why rates are so high. We want to find that out. And this report's the state's attempt at determining the answer to that. Yet it's still in draft form. It's only 7 pages long. It deals with data from 2017 to 2019. Today's 2025. And I find it as a legislator, that's outrageous.
The problem with managing general agents and their affiliates has existed in this state for a very long time. How does the office justify receiving this report that seemed to indicate $14 billion went to affiliates and they just dropped the ball because they were too busy?
2 witnesses were called before the committee, the state's current insurance commissioner, Mike Jaworski, and the insurance commissioner when the report was written, David Altmaier. Neither had very good answers, especially to the question why the report was never finished.
And who stopped this work, Commissioner?
We have looked hard and fast. I do not know.
Why did the investigation stop? Why didn't we get a completed report? What happened? Who made that decision to say this isn't important enough?
So I would say that nobody made that decision. And candidly, when I was asked to come and speak here today, that's the one question that I haven't been able to come up with an answer to, because candidly speaking, I thought the work was continuing. I really thought that as we had these conversations at a staff level, that the understanding was that we were going to go and address the concerns that we had in the draft report. So my recollection at the time is that we were going to continue that work.
Many legislators complain they should have had this information when they were deciding what laws to pass.
I think we have all raised questions about these premiums and the rates climbing repeatedly, and so clearly we didn't know, and you had the opportunity to share this with us. I guess my question still is, why didn't you?
To share the report with you?
To share the problem with us that the insurers were transferring money to the affiliates, making their company look broke and raising the rates of our citizens. That.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the supposition in that would be that the transfer of money itself was making the company broke, and I don't think that that's established within any record we have.
And therein lies the problem. If you don't look for the answers, you're not going to find them. In fact, the existence of this report would have never been public if it wasn't for the reporter who kept pressing for answers. Asked why the report wasn't made public when the reporter asked for it more than 2 years ago, here is Commissioner Jaworski's rambling response.
There seems to have been a request made in 2022, and that request was there was I think a written response provided to the reporter that it was not an open record at that point. And then there is a period of time where there seems to be mostly verbal, some email follow-up between the reporter and our comms director at that time, following up on the request, or renewing the request might be the better term. And it wasn't various answers. A lot of what seems to be verbal communication, not written communication, as to what the circumstances of that discussion are. But I think it is important to acknowledge that that was not a perfect process.
After the hearing, I spoke to State Representative Hillary Cassel, who pressed for answers during that hearing.
I think my main takeaway from that is obviously we still have a lot of unanswered questions that we were, there was a report that had really damaging information. The former commissioner of insurance talked about how that report had red flags, there was smoke, there was fire, there was a lot of information contained within that report that was really that the legislature really could have relied on to look into this years before. And because the report was not produced to anybody or not even discussed with anybody, we weren't able to. So we need to get to the bottom of why that was. And I think when we need to gather some additional information neither to uncover that.
It seemed as if they were both the current commissioner and the former commissioner seemed to sort of argue that it was just sort of a bureaucratic, it fell through the cracks kind of thing. Do you accept that?
Absolutely not. This is a problem that we've known historically has plagued the marketplace when we look at these managing general agents and their affiliates, dating back, as I mentioned in my testimony, back to as early as 2009 with a report from the Insurance Consumer Advocate. We know several insurance, we know an insurance company has been fined for this type of abusive behavior. We know insurance companies have gone insolvent for this type of behavior. So saying that this fell through the cracks at a time where we really needed to figure out what was happening in our insurance market and why we were in this crisis is definitely not an okay answer for me.
There was a special session, there have been several special sessions, but there was a special session in 2022 that generated Senate Bill 2A, which you talked about during the hearing. You described it as hostile to consumers and that it was basically a gift to the insurance industry. Tell me a little bit about what that bill did and why you believe that was the case.
Yeah, so several of the reforms that were passed were pieces of legislation that I had fought against as a consumer advocate coming to Tallahassee, advocating for everyday Floridians on this issue for years. And when you would see this bill come through the committee process where consumers had an opportunity to present and legislators really had an opportunity to vet these individual pieces of legislation out, oftentimes they fail to make it through the committee process. But when it's put through in a special session situation, usually that means that's the legislation that's going to pass. And what the reforms really did was focus on all the tools I always say David has to hold Goliath responsible. One of those being the one-way attorney's fees. There was some good pieces of the legislation that passed, abolishing, in my opinion, the assignment of benefits. I think that's where a lot of the abuses in that system came from. But many of the pieces of that legislation specifically targeted consumers and their access to hold insurance companies accountable. And there wasn't anything on the other side of the coin in that particular piece of legislation.
So again, just so we're clear about the timetable and the players, at the time that this report was written in a draft form and never completed, but at the time that it was written and delivered in March of 2022, David Altmaier was the insurance regulator, was the head of the commissioner over insurance for the state of Florida. That special session that occurred later that year in 2022, he advocated for that very bill that we were just talking about, Senate Bill 2A, which you said was a gift to the insurance industry. After that bill passed in the special session, you noted that it was 24 hours later that he essentially resigned on December 28th, 2022, to go and now work as a lobbyist for the insurance industry. And you suggested that there may have been a connection there. Do you believe that there was wrongdoing, or do you think that David Altmaier's actions should be investigated for possible wrongdoing there?
I think we are investigating to get to the bottom of that. At the end of the day, those pieces all line up together. I'm a trial lawyer, right? You need pieces of evidence to get to a final destination of what a verdict is. And I think we're missing some major pieces with regards to making that allegation. But I think looking into the timing and how this draft, or what's being coined as a draft piece, draft report that we spent $150,000 on to get that had red flag, smoke, and fire, but then never saw the light of day, we've got to figure out if there was any motive or agenda as to why that was. And I don't think we have the answers to that yet. Again, we're still in that fact-finding mission, and I know the Speaker of the House is absolutely dedicated to continuing this mission and continuing this investigation to where the pieces might lead us.
The consultant who was hired for that $150,000 to prepare this report, raising serious concerns that basically there were insurance companies that were hiding their money, hiding profits in their affiliates, and therefore then could present that they were losing money when in fact they were just hiding the money that they were making in Florida. The consultant who wrote that report, why not subpoena that person? Find out what they were told and why they didn't continue their work.
Listen, we just wrapped up round one. I think there's a lot more for us to do, and I think that's definitely a conversation that we are having as to what our next step is. I think looking into whether they believed that report was a draft is crucial to answer some of these questions. Do they believe they submitted a complete report that was worthy of further investigation? I think those questions are valid questions for this committee to ask. I think you should stay tuned and see round two.
It seems like the brunt of what the legislature has done up till now has been really on the issue of tort reform, insulating insurance companies from lawsuits, making it harder for individuals to sue insurance companies that they think are not quickly or adequately paying on claims. And that may still have been an issue. And I think that's one of the things that sort of I took away from this hearing is that may have played a role, but this may have also been a factor. And by putting all the emphasis on the litigation portion that really stripped consumers, you didn't look at as you were just saying, the conduct of the insurance companies themselves. Is that a fair way to say it?
That's exactly how I would say it. And again, before I was elected and I was coming up here as a consumer advocate, I always advocated for reforms to the consumer side. There were definitely loopholes that needed to be closed and that there were abuses on that side of the equation. But what always frustrated me in my conversations with legislators is, but it takes two to tango. And when are we going to take a look at why claims are being denied? Why has litigation increased so much? It can't just be because consumers now all of a sudden have these claims and want to file lawsuits.
Additional hearings are expected in the weeks ahead. Now, when we come back, we will talk to State Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez about the state starting its own Doge movement. Stay with us.